Thanks for joining for the April LegRep Network meeting. We've got a small but mighty group, and today's main focus really is, were I to give it a title, it's how to put the noise aside and focus on your priorities. It's something that I have to grapple with as your lead advocacy director, and I know it must be something that you all have to grapple with as well. And so today I'm going to share some resources, but also show you a document that I put together based on what I think I know, with the invitation for you to poke lots of holes at it, because my hope is that it will become a checklist or a roadmap for other ledge reps who are working with their boards to establish district level priorities for their board, for their district at this point in the year. Part of the reason that this is the focus for today is I had a lovely lunch with one of you who aren't here today, but a fellow ledge rep collaborator, Shauna Ballas, last week during lunch, and she's like, how do I help the board stay focused on the things that matter most? And there's certainly lots of approaches to this, and I'm always open to hearing if any of you have some strategies. But I started thinking about how I represent you as your WSSDA staff person in doing just that. So I thought I'd start there as a model and then show you kind of the checklist that I put together based on what I think might work. But this is an invitation for us to build this together. So as you are aware, in the year-round advocacy cycle, right now we are at the point of time in which school boards, hopefully, are reviewing the existing WSSDA positions. So of the existing platform, the 225 positions that exist. And part of that conversation is what's missing from the existing platform that are really important to our staff, students, and local community. And in representing them, what might we consider bringing forward? So right now that position window gives boards the opportunity to make some decisions around that, bringing some potential changes to our platform, either with new positions, revised positions, or the consolidation or retirement of existing positions. So that's great. That's where we're at right now. Hopefully this conversation that you're having can help inform your own establishment of local priorities as well, because we know that a lot of districts create some of their own local priorities, which they advocate for, and some even go so far as to create their own priorities one-pager documents or documents that you use to help communicate and advocate with your legislators. So what that looks like for WSSDA, hopefully you are familiar with this, but if not, it's never too late to learn. Following General Assembly, the adoption of new or revised position platform allows school boards to then quickly turn around and identify their up to top 15 positions, legislative positions from that list. So during about a 2-week window following General Assembly, your board is able to submit what your top 15 basic position priorities are. You could be already having general conversations right now about, and should be actually, what your priorities are for the upcoming year. You don't have to wait till General Assembly, because probably your priorities have a position that's related to it. There may be another one added, so you can always make an adjustment following General Assembly, but you don't have to wait until after General Assembly to have this conversation. So as a result of that prioritization process, which I will say last year, only 96 of the 295 school districts participated in. So there's still a lot of room for improvement and opportunity for participation, which we hope more and more districts will take the opportunity to engage in. I am going to show you the results of that. This hopefully will look very familiar to some of you. I open this up a little bit better for you to see. I'm trying to use Google Chrome more than Safari because Macs like it better, but I'm learning a whole new system here. So excuse me while I navigate this. So when you go under strategic advocacy on our homepage, top navigation, legislative priorities, you will see your member adopted priorities here laid out, both on the screen as well as in a one-page document. So when during the legislative session, there are bills brought forward on these issues, I know that's my calling to put my attention and prioritization on those policy issues. Because we take the top 15 and sort of condense them into some general buckets, there usually are some themes around them. You are probably well aware that generally the most frequent theme is funding resources to more amply and equitably fund your school system. So that might have to do with staffing. Oftentimes special education is a standalone priority, capital and school construction, as well as comprehensive school safety. And of course, revising the STARS formula or making the transportation funding system actually more reflective of your actual costs. And in the last several years, feeding students has been added to that list. So this is the WSSDA priority document based on the prioritization process that school boards have the opportunity to participate in, as and where Ledge Committee provides some input and the WSSDA board adopts. So what's really helpful to me in having this document is that as there are hundreds and hundreds of bills that are presented, filed, and even heard in committees during legislative session, when deciding how active, I mean, I can't possibly, as one or two people, weigh in on every single bill that comes forward. So I use this as sort of the guiding document to say, on behalf of my membership, where does membership want WSSDA's energy placed the most? And it is in these areas. It doesn't mean we don't provide input on other policy proposals, but in terms of where we're going to focus what we're for and what we need, this is the guiding document for that. And I recognize that some of you do something similar to that, but not everybody.
With that event right there.
I'm gonna, I'm sorry to mute folks who sign in, but I just want to make sure folks can hear as we discuss. So thinking about how you might replicate a process like this at the local level, I think some of you have already done this. I wanted to sort of walk through a guidance document that might help. So I'm going to pull that document up, and you will notice that I have a draft watermark on the back. Because it is certainly a draft. Lots of room for potential improvements. So I reiterate in this document, as your board establishes its own priorities for the next legislative session, that these steps would most likely occur in the spring and summer. So while you're participating with your statewide organization at the state level by reviewing the existing position platform, determining any changes to submit through the proposal window, reviewing the General Assembly handbook once it becomes available, most likely in June of this year, participating in General Assembly in the fall, and then prioritizing the legislative positions immediately following General Assembly, late September, early October. You can, as a board, be working to align and elevate whatever the WSSDA priorities are. You probably will have some overlap and maybe a few of your own from the local level. So a step-by-step guide in doing so could look like, immediately following the legislative session, identify the new policies or bills that were passed and any budget areas that will serve to strengthen your district and student outcomes, and thank your legislators for them. While that doesn't sound like it's directly related to your priorities, I promise it will be beneficial as you communicate them to your legislators following the establishment of them. So start with what you got, and then start thinking through multiple board meetings, whether those are work sessions or board meetings, setting aside time at board meetings in the spring to discuss your district needs. Discussing your district needs most certainly should include input from students, particularly if you have student board reps, but certainly if you have other mechanisms like student advisory council or a superintendent's advisory council, staff who present at your board meetings or by invitation, your administration via your superintendent, and then through public comment as well, should inform your discussions around what your district needs are. Using data to inform your district needs, as well as student stories to deepen your understanding of what they are, And I would encourage you in those discussions to be thinking not just about funding related issues, because certainly that's going to come up. I feel confident about that. But what are some of the other policy issue areas that might need some tweaking? I'll give you an example. Just this morning, I met with one of the staffers who supports the House Education Committee. And she and I were talking about past policies that have already been enacted that either weren't adequately funded or need some policy tweaks to make them more feasible for implementation for the district level. And we most specifically talked about the language access bill that passed several years ago, which we do have positions that allowed WSSDA to support it. And there was a commitment at the time from the legislature to fund the language access bill, which essentially requires that you translate your materials for your community member staff and students. However, no funding actually landed in the final budget. So we will be resurfacing the fact that that policy went into place without the adequate funding to come back to ask for it in another session. So that's what I mean about policy matters. It is related to funding, but it actually is a policy issue that passed in the past. I'm gonna walk through these actually, and then what I'm asking for you to think about is if you're already doing something like this, what's missing? And if you're not doing something like this, what else might we be considering from a step-by-step process? So after you do this process of collecting information about what your district needs are, to really figure out, and you may go through a process by doing this, you could replicate it like WSSDA does, picking your top 10 and then figuring out where there's some alignment amongst board members or even a community infrastructure for doing this. What are your top 3 to 5 priorities? You've heard the expression, if you're in support of everything, you're in support of nothing. You really have to focus your energy on certain areas or you will exhaust yourself even more and probably not be very effective. So what are your top 3 to 5 specific priorities as a board that would necessitate legislative action? You may, in making those decisions, use, again, some sort of system by which you engage your community, your staff, and your students. You may also want to reach out to neighboring school districts because there's power or potential in numbers, especially considering that you'll have legislators who represent all of you. Imagine if you and your neighboring school districts had shared priorities and could communicate consistently to your legislators that you shared those priorities together. It would give even more potential for action from your legislators once they get to the legislative session. You should also consider if you have previous year's priorities, or if you don't, what some of the WSSDA, WASA, AWSP priorities were in past years, as well as what your neighboring district's priorities might be. Because if you change your priorities every single year, your legislators might think you a bit fickle and have a hard time staying with you on making sure those policies or requests actually come to fruition. Most specifically because generally it takes a couple years for a policy proposal to come forward during a legislative session and actually turn into a law. So think about it in terms of a long game, and to whatever degree you can remain consistent, you could even consider doing this just once every other year in concert with the biennium. The legislative biennium, so that you're not actually having to go through a full process every year, although there's certainly a benefit in having the conversation. The next step would be basically once you identify those top 3 to 5 priorities, that you craft concise requests of the legislature related to those priorities, including data, charts, and or descriptions of the programs. Don't assume your legislators know what CTE stands for or what it looks like, feels like, or means. Provide definitions, provide understanding, and describe what it is that you're asking for. Don't assume that they understand the education space like you do. Work with your superintendent to develop a one-page priorities document. There's a reason why every education stakeholder group and even other groups outside of the education space create one-page priorities, because the more pages you have, the less likely those additional pages are going to be read. Again, you got to surface what your priorities are and then make them really easy to understand with few words. And yes, I have to say, with pictures and graphics for sure. Hopefully if you have a district's communication team, your superintendent is able to utilize them to help keep your messaging and your design look and feel paralleled with your school district. We would love for you to share whatever your priorities are with WSSDA. By all means, you should absolutely share them with your community, staff, students, and families so they can be singing the same song with you. It's not just about transparency, it's also about potential in numbers. Then once you get all that done, sharing your legislative priority with legislators, obviously it's a catalyst for a conversation. By sharing them, you can find out where they are in the alignment and agreement and what else they might need in order to better understand what you're asking for. They may be in opposition, but only because they don't actually understand what the need is. So this is an opportunity to ask a lot of questions, find out what else they would need in order to move towards a supportive stance. And then continue having a conversation as a ledge rep. Again, one of the tactics or tools we've suggested to you all is to have a standing agenda item on your regular board meeting agenda, whether it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes, that you have a place that you get to provide updates. So part of the year could be, once those priorities are established, you could be sharing what you're hearing from legislators, as well as asking your fellow school board members, what kind of progress are you making in elevating our school district's priorities with our community, staff, students, and legislators? And then maybe even most importantly, and this is where I started from, is that in the midst of a legislative session, and certainly in an interim, and certainly in an election year, there are so many issues that are coming at all of us all the time that will draw our attention. And sometimes those issues demand that we pay attention to them. So I'm not saying not to. However, if we pay attention to everything, we'll never be able to get anything. And so the priorities document can be a guiding document for you to help bring your board back to the conversations you had earlier with input from your staff, students, community about what's most important, so that you can bring yourself back to those values to continue the conversation about how you're going to move the needle in those areas with the support of your legislature and the legislative body moving forward. So like I said, this is just a draft. And then, as with always, you're gonna rinse, cycle, and repeat on this from year to year. So as you think about, as you kind of heard some of this as a proposal, I would love to hear back from you. What are some of the things that you're doing related to this that are working, and how might we be able to inform this in a more concrete way? And then what's missing from this guidance document for other ledge reps that would be beneficial for them to know as you move through this prioritization process? And I'll just open it up for anybody to offer questions or suggestions. Marisa.
I would say one thing that has really helped our school board is by having a placeholder in for every meeting for a legislative update. And that way it's a shared expectation. I mean, part of, what we have is expectation management. And when it's not expected, people are less inclined or less ready to participate. But when the expectation is there that we will discuss this, then I think it kind of raises the bar a little bit and gets all of the board members to understand that this is a shared responsibility and not something just pawned off on the ledge rep to do all the thinking for them.
Nice. So do you call that in your agenda? Do you actually call it a legislative update? Do you call
Yes,
it
we do.
You do a legislative update.
Right.
Are you the ledge rep, Marisa?
I am.
Okay. And so are you expected to bring content to every meeting, or do you for questions? Curious?
Yeah, I mean, I usually have a topic, or if I don't, I mean, in the past, since I've been vice president, even when I was not legislative representative, I made sure that this was an agenda item. And so, I would support, when I was not the ledge rep, I would support the ledge rep in, bringing up items or discussing them. And even now as the ledge rep, I just gently remind my colleagues not to just gloss over this, but this is Really, it needs to be intentional time or dedicated time to really think about and be earnest in wanting to have a discussion about it.
That's great. A couple more questions, and folks, feel free to answer them too when you have an opportunity to share. Is there a general time frame that you allocate every meeting?
Yeah, I mean, usually it's a minimum of about 10 minutes. I mean, sometimes it's longer, like when we're going over priorities, or even when we were trying to come up with position recommendation and, position proposal discussion. We put, I think, 15 or 20 minutes on, and that's when I think I told you last week, they really ended up going longer. But it's okay. The time was set aside because I found in the past, if we only put 5 minutes, then if it went on to 10 minutes, then we would have, pushback and people would say, oh, we're done. Let's just move on. Let's not think about this anymore. And so, if we just try to set aside time, then people know that it's not okay to just, gloss by it or say, oh, well, let's just cut it out.
Great. Thank you, Marisa. I appreciate all that insight. Jen.
Yeah, actually similar to Marisa in Everett, just at our last board retreat in August, we made the legislative update a standing item on our agenda for the entire year. And obviously during session, there was a lot more to report out. And at the last meeting afterwards, it was obviously very quick. We do allocate 15 minutes in our planning for it, but it's actually been shorter than that. And there's not a lot of necessarily discussion on it. It's mostly me reporting out and getting material from these types of meetings and bringing it back. But I think it has helped. It has helped just elevate that work that we do as a board. And so I'm excited to sort of keep going with that momentum. But all the others is sort of what we also follow, creating the one pager and using things from these meetings to bring forward. So I'm pretty excited about this work. But exactly, the allocating time at a board meeting, I think is pretty key.
That's great. Thank you for that input, Jen. I would also invite any of you who are able to right now, if you have past priorities documents that you are willing to share in the chat. I imagine some folks would love to borrow from your experience if you are, again, willing to share. I'm realizing that that's from last year, but hopefully there will be some carryover to next year as well, since we didn't get everything we asked for again. Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, that kind of one of the things I wanted to ask, because I was on the board in the fall. We did go through a process similar to this. I wasn't the legislative rep though, so I don't know if this happens, but is there an opportunity as we're crafting our different platforms or having these conversations, like to be able to share a little bit of that so that, to the point that you made, Marissa, understanding what our neighboring districts are doing, or maybe being able to say like, oh, wow, we have this shared interest in X. So I don't know if there's sort of a forum or a platform for that to happen. And these are more questions than I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm also curious what community engagement looks like around legislative priorities. We kind of had the realization in Lake Washington that we have a large community, a very passionate and involved community that we probably haven't been leveraging as well as we could. To really directly support the efforts of the board and the district in the legislative space. So if there's anyone here or just in general who has done that effectively or has kind of been able to get your not just district staff and board members, because we testify in bills and stuff, but getting other community members to show up in support of your priorities, I would love to hear what that looks like, because that's something that we're exploring doing more of.
That's great, Lisa. I'm so glad you asked that question, because I was really hopeful some folks here might have some models that they would be willing to share. Sarah?
So I will second Lisa's desire to find ways that we can know what other districts are interested in proposing and working together on that. Something that I really appreciated WASDA did this year was adding into the process, and kind of one of the check boxes on the submittal form is, have you connected with your legislative committee representatives? Because we do have a whole committee that have been elected by our peers to work in this capacity to help support each other in this. I'll say that that's been really positive this year. I've had several, including Lisa, I've had several board directors reach out saying, hey, we're thinking about these proposals. And then having the ability to say, oh, I'm familiar with so-and-so, you should connect with them. And then also making sure that as Ledge Committee members, we share that with all the representatives who serve our DA. So like I then forwarded it to my colleagues because they may be hearing. So we're making sure that we're working collaboratively across our entire DA. So we all know what's happening. And that's really helped strengthen some proposals that some districts in our area are thinking about, kind of giving a heads up on like, oh, what are people thinking? It's also given us the opportunity to work with some districts to say, hey, that's already an existing position. Have you looked at that? Let's talk about how that might work. Like, what's your intent? So really supporting our membership in that collective process. I think that's been a really excellent addition. The other thing I would encourage individual boards and ledge reps to do is attend your legislator town halls and invite legislators to come visit your district and join any community conversations you're having, or come on a school visit. I'd like to go ride a bus with Mike. I think Mike has a prime opportunity to say, come ride a bus with me, come see what it's like, right? Really have them experience it in person because it really hits home when that happens.
Great, Sarah. Thank you so much. Sarah, do I remember that you or maybe somebody else had established some kind of process for engaging community feedback in the establishment of district priorities or board priorities?
I would say just in that we do it as a multi-meeting process that's very public. So we don't do it as a one-off, it's a multiple conversations. I don't think we have we engage our student reps really deeply in that work. And they survey out the students. And multiple years in a row, our priorities have had either an additional priority added by the students that the board directors had not identified, notably around climate. So I would say those are the ways that we do. We haven't done another. I would love to hear how other people are engaging their community though on developing legislative priorities.
Don't see anybody else's hands up. Any other comments about anything that's been laid out here, questions that you have, or suggested additions?
I might add just one thing. We are a district that doesn't have a high school, so my participation in the as a legislative rep is more of a listening part. I'm learning so much from all of you, and setting ourselves up. We don't seem like we have a lot of strength. We can bring our representatives to the school, but they don't give us a lot of attention since we don't have a high school, but we still have the same problems that every district has. So this is extremely important for me to just listen in, and I try to take advantage of every opportunity to listen to you guys. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike. Marisa.
Okay, one of the things that we do a collaboration between our superintendents and our ledge reps within Pierce County, our county, is that in November or December of every year, we come together and we invite all of the legislators within the county area to come together, and we have a facilitated discussion kind of with an agenda to the whole room, but then table discussion with, making sure that there's at least a superintendent and ledge rep at each table with legislators to talk about some of these priorities, and so that we can come together with a shared, we get together and make sure that our priorities are at least aligned so that we can present, our top priorities to the legislators in a brief handout, for the county-wide priorities that we share, because sometimes they differ from the statewide priorities that exist within WSSDA just because of our geographic location, sometimes crime or other issues that directly and uniquely impact our school districts.
That's great. And did you say, Marisa, that you do that once a year in November?
Yeah, we do that. We do that particular one in November or December of every year. But then we also just try to get together more informally, just via phone call or email before Day on the Hill, before General Assembly, and then of course at our DA director area meetings within WSSDA. And in fact, that's where the idea came from, was what it was at one of those DA meetings. We said, gosh, we should really get together, and try to talk, just in a larger group instead of just a single school district, make it a collaborative effort amongst all the school districts within the county, towards those legislators. And it's quite a few, because the legislative districts are, cut up a little bit differently. So we end up having a pretty good turnout every year.
That's great. Thank you. I think David is reiterating the importance of that South Sound regional meeting. Said it was very valuable. Thanks for that. Sherry. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Marisa, for bringing that up. I think that's a wonderful idea. Snohomish County encompasses several schools. I don't know how many, but that would be a wonderful idea. I think I will talk to Shauna and some other folks about that. My question was, though, to the group was, how do we elevate these priorities with our individual board members? I was just thinking about that. I feel like I give a 5 or 10 minute blurb, and in some ways I feel like, oh, I don't want to take too much time, and I get really zealous and excited about, this is the biggest thing since sliced bread. You have to hear what's going on in the legislature, and I'm very passionate and I get excited. But I don't know that it resonates my enthusiasm, but it doesn't bring a call to action. So I would like to find out more concretely, maybe, how I can make these priorities all of our priorities, like task each board member with saying, okay, as you said in here, what are the individual board members doing to elevate those priorities within our community? I would love to hear either examples of that or just put that in our heads if there's recommendations. And then, like, I'm the person who's sharing out. I'm kind of the mouthpiece, but all of us, right, are working on different parts, and we should have that responsibility. So I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. It's a great question. I'll lean on the group to answer if they've got any advice. Lisa?
Yeah, some of this may depend on sort of the makeup of your board and the interest of the different board members and time. But one thing that was great for me was that we have the pre-session meetings with our legislators and the post-session meetings. And even in the fall, when I was actually a brand new board member and not ledge rep, it was very well accepted that we spread that load across the directors. And so making sure that everybody's, like, I got to sit in on a couple of those meetings, and it does help make it real. So yeah, I know we've had just people with different schedules and different time constraints, but actually it's helpful because I think we cover 4 or 5 legislative districts. So we have a lot of legislators that we meet with, and so it's pretty easy to hop on a Zoom call, even making time in my workday to hop on a Zoom call, and that was really really helpful. So now we're doing the post-session meetings now, and I'm trying to step back and be like, I have some time, I can do this, but if another board member wants to go, like, by all means, I don't want to monopolize them. Yeah, so that's been helpful for us. And same with Day on the Hill. We did our own, where we set up some of our own meetings, but it was 3 of us who went, and that was a really great experience.
That's great. Thank you for that, Lisa. I'm wondering if once you have priorities established as a board, because that's been a collective discussion, and again, you don't have to go through this process. You could decide as a board that you want to utilize the WSSDA priorities, or take the WSSDA, WASA, and AWSP priorities and zhuzh them together and figure out. I mean, you don't have to invent this from scratch. It could be a process by which you're using existing resources to come together, especially in the first couple of years that you're doing it and you're building your program of advocacy. But perhaps if once you get that established time during your board meeting agendas where you're creating a space for the ledge rep to be sharing, it becomes a shared lift. So after your priorities are established, that you identify which of you is going to share with which legislator or which community group or staff or students, and then it provides an opportunity. Okay, who did you share it with and what did you learn in those conversations? So it's a shared lift and opportunity for everybody to sort of report out on their progress for this advocacy work. I also wonder if there, as long as folks, you and other members of your board understand what legislative updates means, I guess I would be concerned that, as per usual, we just think about legislative updates as happening during the legislative session. It's more like advocacy updates or legislative advocacy, something like that expands it beyond just thinking that your role is just during the session and then there's no other work to be done. Because really, the harder work on your parts is doing the conversations and the lift during the interim. As opposed to during ledge session, which is definitely more rapid fire, but it's more reporting out on progress as opposed to actually having conversations that inform where you want to put your energy happens during the interim. Sarah.
If your legislative updates are constrained in time, like it's a you're saying like it's a 5 to 10 minute time frame. There's so much in legislative updates that are education for our fellow board members. Almost everything we do connects with legislation. So you might find moments that you can tie an existing board discussion to either recently passed legislation or upcoming considered legislation, and then like infuse it in those places. Because I think when board directors hear like, oh, that is directly connected to this funding shortfall we have, their connection to their importance of them knowing that and being a part of that becomes really clear, I think. So that might be an opportunity. Every board runs their meetings really differently, right? So obviously you feel out what feels right, but that may be an opportunity.
I'd also be curious. Thank you, Sarah. That's an important reminder, that it's all connected, right? Legislative advocacy or advocacy itself isn't something that happens over here and then all the other work that you have to do, right? It is commingled. It is interdependent. And so as a part of that, I'm wondering how, and I don't have an answer to this, I would look to y'all who have more experience with strategic planning updates, right? Like as you're looking at the district's strategic plan and progress towards meeting goals, like how advocacy can inform that, be infused into that, and can actually help propel it, right? So maybe as you're thinking about the goals of your strategic plan and the role that your board plays, where is advocacy? I mean, you might not even have to have this conversation setting aside the needs conversation because it's already been established what your district's needs are through your strategic planning and your goal setting, right? So that might have happened in some way, and that can be a starting point for the conversation. So interesting. Any other comments, thoughts, guidance related to this? Is a document like this helpful for you? And how could it be even more helpful than just having it like this? A roadmap, infographics, videos. How do you learn this type of thing, and how do your fellow school board members best receive it? while you're thinking about that, it gives me a chance to finish our thoughts here.
Yeah, Amanda put in chat that examples are helpful, and yeah, that like just how we just shared some of our one pagers, it would just be helpful to link out to those as an example in that particular item.
Thank you. Let me actually pull up. I downloaded the links that folks provided related to your plans. So I'm just going to pull this first one up here. So it looks like, Sarah, your board's legislative priorities from 2024 are on a web page and available as a one-pager. In terms of how you designed this, does the process that your board took to design this similar to what we just laid out in a sort of a checklist type of document? Anything else to note about how this came to exist?
Well, all design credit goes to our one public relations and communications person, who that's not even her whole job. And so I give all design and layout credit to the amazing Rachel Belfield here in Shoreline School District. We really go through a process of discussing key priorities as it relates to key concerns or issues happening in the district. No surprise that right now that is predominantly focused on funding. Talking through, you know, we've been doing this for a few years, so it's helpful because I can bring back last year's and say, here's where we were last year. Here's what's changed. Here's what we understand about needs. Here's, as legislative representative, I often bring like an initial set of thoughts, like here's some initial proposals. We discuss it together. I bring back a revised one based on board input. We finalize it. Obviously, work collaboratively with our superintendent and our cabinet as well, really lean on their expertise. And then once the board says, yep, this looks good. And I already talked about how we fold in the student reps in the process. So when I say board, to me, that's inclusive of our student reps. Once we say that looks good, we send it off to that one person, Rachel, who formats it beautifully, and then we have and post it to the website, and then we have that available.
Thanks, Sarah. Did you, following ledge session, did you take a look back at this document by chance and evaluate where progress was made and where gaps still exist?
That is a great question. I mean, we did do a post-session recap. I didn't align it to the document because we were doing such intensive following through session. But we have a meeting tonight, so you're giving me a prompt to highlight that tonight.
Nice. Yeah, I think just from the perspective of you don't have to recreate the wheel, this is a great guiding document. And as you, I mean, you could even take this for next year and maintain the stuff that didn't get done and judge some of the things that did. And even for all of you, I would recommend ensuring acknowledgement in some way, whether it's on this document or in another communication to your legislators, where they did make investments or what they did do in a previous session that helped you get to where you are today. Very valuable. Okay, that was so now this is Lake Washington. Let's see.
And yeah, the process for this, and again, I was like half in, half out as ledge rep, but yeah, we discussed it in a study session, I think in like October. We did start with our previous priorities. There are a lot of carryovers, like we will always ask for fully funding special education and for a simple majority for bonds, I think, probably till the end of time. But yeah, and then our district communication staff, I think, put it together in this nice format. Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm very appreciative, especially as a new ledge rep, to the work that our district puts into to support this. So basically our CFO came back at the last board meeting. She gives updates throughout the legislative session, and she did give an update at our last board meeting. Actually, I can link to the slides here, where she specifically tied the sort of categorized bills under these big headers that we had, like diversity, equity, inclusion, student support and achievement, and so on, and then said which bills passed and failed, and sort of walked through that process.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful. I am trying to download, Jen, your Everett one, but I am having some Adobe has given me a hard time, so I'm not able to download that. I'm sorry. I want to give you credit where credit's due, but hopefully Amanda and Natasha have been able to download it themselves. I imagine as they're thinking about how to help develop a toolkit, we'll be using examples. If anybody has any problems with us using these examples as part of that toolkit, please let us know. Okay. Any school boards in the midst of having this planning happening right now, like in the course of your conversations, what are the conversations that you are having right now during your board meetings about advocacy work? I'm just curious at this point in time in the advocacy cycle. Jen?
Just most recently, we had put out, gone through our priorities. What wins did we have? Put numbers next to them. So our financial director put that to it. We put it in a document, and we were just signing and sending those out last week. In addition to that, I also did the handwritten cards just as ledge rep to send to them too. So we're in the thanking stage at this point. And then for the next couple of months, it will be a couple of targeted invitations to follow up on some things. And then we're already looking towards next fall about some of that collaboration with other districts, and whether we want to, how we want that to look in the fall, inviting them in all together for one event or individual to each school, that sort of thing. So that'll be a board retreat discussion for us.
That's great. Thank you. Very concrete. Looks like Lisa also shared, is this a PowerPoint presentation, Lisa?
Yep, this was, we also have, as we were talking about before, have a slot set aside for, we call it public and community affairs, but that's where legislative updates slot in. So our associate superintendent just walked through this deck with the whole board.
And who created this?
She did. We had a discussion about it. She's like, yep, I can do it. I'm like, I can help if you want. She's like, I got it. And she did.
Great. What kinds of questions came up from the board, and was she able to answer them?
Yes, she was definitely able to answer them. There weren't a whole lot of questions because, again, she had been updating all throughout the legislative session, and everybody, like all 5 board members, I would say can speak to especially sort of the big rocks, and she would go into a little bit more on some of the more detailed ones, but yeah, for the most part, everybody's pretty aware of the big priorities that we're trying to move. As I mentioned, yeah, when we do the pre-session meetings, post-session's been a little bit more loosey-goosey, but pre-session especially, like I would be assigned one of these legislative priorities to speak to with our legislators, which was actually very helpful for me because I was terrified at first. I mean, like I'd been on the board for just a few months, and like, oh my God, you want me to talk to like a legislator? Like this is really scary. But they had me talk about AI usually because that's a real passion of mine. And I had some talking points, so I was familiar with that space, and then also I was listening to what everybody else was talking to. So yeah, there weren't a ton of questions that came up just because really everybody's had, at least it's hard to ignore completely over the past few months.
Thanks, Lisa. That's really helpful. Okay, we just have a few minutes left. We've covered some good territory. I am curious from y'all what you would like to talk about in May. What would be low-hanging fruit for you, or the most important next thing, or the biggest question or issue you have as it relates to advocacy, legislation, what you should be doing, what's happening, what kinds of things would be most beneficial for this time that you spend with us. Let me just look at the date of my calendar. We will come back together on May 7th at noon. You can just type it into the chat, or you can share it out loud if it requires a little more description.
I'll share out loud.
Yeah, Mike.
MSOC funding, it's
Okay.
killing us.
Okay.
It's our number one priority in our small district.
Okay.
Given-
So what do you want to learn? You want to learn about how to advocate for it, what to ask for, what?
Exactly. It seems like we fall short every year, and we fell short again this year, substantially.
Okay.
I think our district got $29,000, big $29,000 bump, which is like $21 per student or some crazy number. It's, we pretty much got nothing and wanted to like it this session. I think with everything that we were fighting for, and yeah, that's one of the items that is a priority for our district.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. I'll probably, I'm happy to bring in some folks who can speak to that with expertise for sure. I will tell you all that given our existing position platform, we do have a MSOC specific position already that was not prioritized going into the legislative session. However, there was appetite for it. And so we did some zhuzhing of the type of advocacy that you all wanted to lead, particularly during Ledge Conference and Day on the Hill. And thankfully, there were legislators who recognized the need, and Representative Steve Berquist sponsored the MSOC bill that actually did advance up to the 21 cents. It would have been even less than that had that bill not come to fruition. So if we get a head start on this conversation sooner, and would love to see that if this is a shared interest of more of our school districts, that it elevates itself on our priorities list as a standalone issue area. So that's great. Thanks for that input. Any other issue areas or strategies, approaches you'd like to learn more about in May?
You know this one for me. Our MSOCs we have a big gap, but our substitute cost is astronomical right now. And we get a budget report tonight, and the trend line is just like going so steeply up. So I'd love to brainstorm how we can effectively work with legislators on something that they don't like. MSOC was a great example this year. Like, it wasn't on their radar. They just didn't even realize until we all collectively brought it forward, which was such a win this year. I feel like substitutes is that the substitute cost is the same realm. Like, every time I talk to the legislator about, they're like, really? What? It's just not even on their radar. And then getting them up to speed on a whole funding issue that they weren't even aware of. And then being able to do so really effectively collectively, would love to strengthen us that way.
Great. Well, I think with an hour of time, MSOC and subcost probably will fill it all up. So maybe what would be helpful, I'll send out an email to the full group about this, is any sort of data that you can have prepared in advance for that conversation would probably be helpful. So I will send out a nudge to everybody to be working with their teams to identify where what funding is doing and what it's not doing and what you need. So those are some great conversations for you also to be having with your superintendent and your business team. Cool. Okay. That wraps us up for today.